I don't remember those. I just remember the ones that still have an impact on me. So I said we'd go and have a look at the story of the USS Indianapolis to see how it correlates, how that scene, how that monologue befits the actual reality. So this is from Fascinating. So 1.37 million subscribers. Go and give them a subscribe, guys. Go and give this video a full watch, because I'm going to be interrupting it, obviously. Yeah, let's see what it is. This is what happens here. Fascinating horror. Okay.
On the 30th of July, 1945, the American Navy cruiser, the USS Indianapolis, was hit.
Pretty sure he said June in the movie scene.
By 2 torpedoes fired by a Japanese submarine.
True.
The ship, with over 1,000 crewmen on board, sank into the ocean in little more than
That correlates.
10 minutes, leaving around 900 sailors adrift and awaiting rescue.
So everything they've said, he said 12 minutes, little more than 10 minutes, 12 minutes correlates. 1,100 men, he said that about 1,000, 1,100 men, that correlates. Sunk, that correlates.
For those 900 or so men, the wait would be one of the longest and most challenging of their lives.
Oh, yeah.
An ordeal which only a fraction of those who lived through the sinking would survive.
Ooh.
The USS Indianapolis was launched in 1931 and started active service with the Navy the very next year. Though constructed during peacetime, she was nonetheless put to good use. As well as taking part in numerous maneuvers and training exercises.
When I was in New York in 2009, was it the Enterprise I went and saw? She was there as a ship people could go and see, so she was not commissioned anymore. She's a big girl.
She also welcomed on.
And when I was in the Falklands, we had all the big carriers, and we had a couple of Olympus-class submarines turn up.
On board President Franklin D. Roosevelt on 3 separate occasions, carrying him to state visits and diplomatic functions. During the war, the Indianapolis saw plenty of action. When the Japanese carried out a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, she spent the immediate aftermath scouring the seas in search of the perpetrators. She later took part in numerous battles in the Pacific Theater over the course of the war, narrowly survived a direct hit from a Japanese kamikaze bomber, and participated in the bombardment of Iwo Jima in
So that girl and her crew, they're part of history. And to become a bigger part of history yet again, if all of that wasn't enough, they then have what's going to happen to them happen. As is the case with war and soldiers and sailors and airmen and nurses and civilians that get caught up in it all. But yeah, we'll look at this.
1945. Just a few weeks before her sinking, the Indianapolis carried out a top-secret mission, delivering parts of the bomb that would eventually be dropped on Hiroshima, brutally ending Japan's involvement in the war.
Yeah.
It is safe to say that
He said the bomb, but it was just parts.
Indianapolis was a ship of great importance throughout World War II, and it remained so right up until the 30th of July, 1945.
Okay.
On this date, the ship was on its way from Guam to Leyte for a training exercise. There were about 1,200 people on board. Visibility was limited, and the Indianapolis was proceeding with caution when, at midnight, 2 torpedoes fired by a Japanese submarine smashed into her starboard side.
Oh.
The ship listed sharply, and chaos erupted on board. Communications broke down. So
it's midnight, they've hit at the right time. She'd have been, I don't know if she'd been sailing dark, but she certainly wouldn't have been bright, loud and lively, because she was going through the waters carefully. So in that monologue, he doesn't build all of that, but this history gives that monologue way more depth. If it didn't have enough depth already, she was already on the quiet.
Some sailors were told to abandon ship, while others worked frantically to save the vessel.
Oh.
Their efforts were in vain, though. In just under 12 minutes, the Indianapolis rolled over onto her side and sank beneath the waves.
Oh.
Around 300 sailors lost their lives during the sinking, leaving approximately 900 cast adrift in the...
Yeah, 860 went into the water. That's right. So 300 men had already gone, just went down with her. And some would have been trapped, some might have been dead already, killed by the explosion. It doesn't say where it was on the starboard side. I don't know where the crew was, where the galleys were. But yeah, a real scene of chaos and terror and horror, I guess, with people trying to act within what their operating procedures would have been when they've been drilled for this. You know, they would have drilled to anticipate this. But still 300 went down straight away.
The waters of the Pacific. All they had with them were the clothes and life jackets on their backs, and whatever wreckage had been ejected from the ship as it sank. There were very few life rafts and flotation nets for the men in the water, meaning that many simply had to cling on to whatever debris they could find, or link arms with one another and rely solely on their life jackets to keep.
So that's what he said, they were linking arms, so that's that circular formation. So it was initially done for survival and not to drift off, because men could fall asleep and others would stand guard.
Keep them afloat.
Yeah.
Any hopes of a swift rescue faded gradually away over the hours which followed. Night gave way to day, which gave way to night again. The survivors floated amidst the wreckage of their ship, with nothing on the horizon in any direction except for mile upon mile of open ocean. There was no shelter from the blazing sun during the day, and no respite from the freezing cold at night. The immersion in salt water caused their skin to peel, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them at any moment. Their only sustenance was whatever they could find in the floating debris, tinned meat and sodden crackers. Drinkable water was simply not available. As the days passed and the situation grew more desperate, many men succumbed to delirium. They hallucinated wildly, believing that they could see islands on the horizon. Some set out to swim towards these hallucinatory islands, and were never seen again. Others, dehydrated and confused, tried to dive down to the wreck of their ship to fetch food and water, only to drown in the attempt.
Good Lord.
Sailors, driven mad by thirst and heatstroke, turned on their fellow survivors, or took their own lives. Worse still, during this long wait for salvation, they were not alone in the water. Sharks were drawn to the area by the presence of dead bodies and injured men.
Yes.
They fed on the dead at first, and then on the injured, picking off exhausted sailors one by one as the hours wore on. Lowell Dean Cox.
So he did say 6 an hour. So that everything he said has real elements of truth and slightly stylized to give the monologue more depth, but because you couldn't have got into the history of the Indianapolis. It wouldn't have made sense. They had to focus in on the horror of the shark attacks. So yeah, they did. It came for the injured, the dead first, then the injured.
Cox, a survivor of the disaster, gave this account of seeing sharks in the water. We were losing 3 or 4 each night and day.
Not every hour.
You were constantly in fear because you'd see them all the time. Every few minutes.
He said 6 an hour. That was absolute dramatization. It's 3 or 4 each night.
You'd see their fins. 12 to 24 fins in the water. They would come up and bump you. I was bumped a few times. You never know when they are going to attack you. In that clear water, you could see the sharks circling. Then, every now and then, like lightning, one would come straight up and take a sailor and take him straight down. One came up and took the sailor next to me. The situation was getting worse and worse with every hour, and yet it seemed that no rescue operation was underway.
No.
2 days passed.
2 days?
Then 3. The men were certain that they had been forgotten, that they were lost and beyond saving. It was only halfway through the 4th day, spent in unimaginable conditions, that their fortunes changed. A routine patrol flight passing over the area spotted men in the water. After dropping off the few life rafts and supplies it had available, it returned to base and dispatched every vessel that was available to the scene to rescue the now exhausted survivors of the Indianapolis. First to arrive on the scene was another aircraft, with Lieutenant Commander Robert Adrian Marks behind the controls. Despite hazardous conditions, he risked a water landing, and took on board 56 of the injured and exhausted men, even loading them onto the wings to get them out of the water. With so many men on board, he could not take off again, but he remained there to provide a much-needed refuge for many survivors while they awaited the arrival of boats.
So he lands it in the water, get them on the wings away from the sharks, get them in the hull. 56, he's probably got about 90 people there. And that one piece of metal becomes a bastion of hope.
The rescue began in earnest when ships arrived on the scene after dark on the 4th day. The searchlights of the USS Cecil J. Doyle and 6 other ships, cutting through the night, marked the beginning of the end of the 80-hour ordeal the survivors had lived through. They were taken on board, transported back to land, and delivered urgently to hospitals. Of the 900 or so who had gone into the water, only 316 survived until help finally arrived. Why had the survivors in the water had to wait so long to be rescued? Distress calls were made using the radio on board the Indianapolis in the frantic few minutes between it being hit.
So in the scene, Quint Shaw said that it was so secret that nobody even knew they were there. There were distress calls were put out. Let's pull that back a bit.
To be rescued. Distress calls were made using the radio on board the Indianapolis in the frantic few minutes between it being hit and sinking. Wherever these distress calls were received, however, they were not acted upon. So
there was an element of outcome of truth. Nobody knew they were there.
In one case, it is believed that the commander who might have authorized a response was drunk when he received the news,
good Lord,
and so did nothing. In another case, the SOS was written off as a Japanese trick. And in the third instance, it was not properly reported as the senior commander on duty was involved in a game of cards and had asked not to be disturbed.
Oh, good Lord.
The fact that...
Jesus. Human incompetence and arrogance and ignorance in the time of any time. Good God.
That the Indianapolis did not arrive at its intended destination of Leyte might have rung some alarm bells. But here, again, an opportunity for a...
So they didn't deliver the bomb. He said they did.
Swifter rescue operation was missed. The Indianapolis was such a large ship that its movements were not tracked as closely as some smaller vessels. With officers instead assuming that it was where it was supposed to be unless they received reports to the contrary. It was believed that, so huge was the Indianapolis, that were it not to show up on time, its absence would be instantly reported up the chain of command.
So its own demise was its size, its history. There was a level of presupposed, not invincibility, but arrogance and naivety.
This practice of relying on reports of a no-show rather than actively verifying a ship's position was scrapped following the sinking and replaced with the movement report system, which remains in place to this day. In the aftermath of the sinking, blame for the disaster was pinned on the captain of the Indianapolis, Charles McVeigh, who, it was alleged, had failed to steer the ship in a zigzag pattern. Doing so was standard practice when there was a risk of submarine attack, as it would make the ship a more difficult target. He was court-martialed and lived out the rest of his days in shame, eventually taking his own life in 1968. This was distressing news for some survivors of the Indian...
I don't think the court-martial was the final, but I guess we'll never know.
Indianapolis. They did not blame Captain McVeigh. After all, he had not been warned of submarine activity along the route, and had been denied his request for a destroyer to accompany the ship as an escort. He had not been responsible for the ignored SOS calls, nor the failure to notice when the Indianapolis...
Bit of scapegoating going on there, don't you think, potentially?
This did not arrive at its destination. He was, as far as many survivors were concerned, a scapegoat for the failings of others.
Said it.
Despite an ongoing campaign to exonerate him, the record would not be set straight until 1996. It was then that a 6th grade student named Hunter Scott brought national media attention to the story after...
6th grade nerd! With glasses, we love nerds.
Corresponding with hundreds of survivors as part of a school project. With renewed attention on the events of more than 50 years ago, survivors, legal professionals, and ex-military personnel
Yes.
were able to work together to have McVeigh posthumously cleared of any
Pardoned.
wrongdoing. While
Was he cleared or pardoned? I'll have to look that up. Anyone know?
adrift at sea, the survivors of the sinking of the USS Indianapolis might well have thought themselves forgotten or abandoned. None could know then that, even decades after the events they endured, there would be people who cared enough to remember those who died, to record the history of their passing, and to set right the injustice that their captain was subject to.
Perfect. Great. Cracking little video. I'll link it, and I'm going to give them a subscribe. I'll go back and look at these guys when I've got another thing. Because I'm not... What's the word I'm looking for? When I think about war movies, and this is something you can all do, there are very few which I've truly admired, very few which I've watched, and I've thought, that's, for me, that's how I would feel as a soldier. That's the sense I got when I was in training. That's a more realistic action that friends who've been veterans, and I've, a couple of dicey situations, but nothing spectacular. A lot of them let you down with the post-war stuff was what it was. Like Audie Murphy, even though he's a decorated soldier, and John Wayne single-handedly winning every war, that was propaganda. Some of the movies that hopefully you guys will put in the comments and here in the chat, it'll be about why. Why does it touch you? Yeah. Because that whole thing, and going back to the monologue itself, the actual monologue, when you look at the story, the harsh reality, the horror is there within the monologue. You didn't have to know the rest of the story when you listen to that monologue about the Indianapolis. You don't have to now know. It doesn't matter that there was 1 man or 50 men killed by sharks. Sharks were there, sharks did their damage. It was a story of horror and terror that can be inflicted by nature. And it did. The sun, the dehydration, the blistering, the delusions, the absolute people swimming down and drowning and swimming off to, that Oasis effect. It looks real, I'm going to go for it, and dying. They took their jackets off and said, I can't swim with this jacket on, whatever. But then the story afterwards, the captain being the scapegoat, which I thought it was when I heard it, and then later on you get a nerd who says, I'm not having that. Does a school project, and all of a sudden he's rewriting history. Brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah. I love it. Gonna come back and do some more of this stuff. Yep. But until next time, guys.